epigenetics.
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that was going to make an announcement. Is everyone okay with this recording?
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have any security clearance or anything. It's okay.
But this is Stuart Kauffmann. If we're going to record it, somebody has to be in charge of getting the rest of us to pay so that, you know, it's not revealed that we're not embarrassed. This might be worth a lot of money.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll just carry on what I was saying then. I'm a PhD student at Oxford, bioinformatician mostly, expression of transposable elements in development, also interested in experimental evolution, particularly if epigenetics plays a role independent of allelic change or DNA sequence changes, and also aging and the role of alternative splicing in aging and fasting. Longevity protocols, these types of things. But I also have a keen interest in theoretical biology, the history of biology, and particularly kind of the topics of the extended evolutionary synthesis. That's where I kind of got involved with Dennis Noble, and we've started working together. As an undergrad, though, kind of pointing towards more of this discussion, I've, like Charlie, had a really keen interest in some of the topics we'll be discussing: cellular cognition, memory and learning, agency, these types of things. I even devised my own associative learning experiments in the true slime mold as an undergrad. And I really don't get a lot of time to pick up these ideas or engage with them much anymore. So I'm really thankful that Charlie invited me to this discussion so I can hopefully get my head back into the game and discuss these ideas with you.
Okay, Dr. Baluska, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you. So thank you, Charlie, for organizing this. So I'm originally a plant scientist. We initiated the plant neurobiology movement some 20 years ago. And also I'm interested in cell biology, evolution in general. And in 5-6 years ago, I teamed up with two colleagues from US, Arthur Reber, who is a psychologist, and William Miller, who is also on its own. And we are publishing several papers now, and also a book called The Sentient Cell, and we are interested in cell cognition, cell sentience.
Charlie, we got on, if you've already spoken about yourself, we didn't have the pleasure of hearing it. Can you say, if you've already spoken, can you say who you are and stuff like that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I told the group that I have no particular academic qualification to be in this conversation, but I've been very, very deeply interested in this question of biological agency for the past 5 years or so. And I've participated in some groups, including with Dennis Noble, and done some collaboration with Richard Watson as well recently, and just published a paper in Dr. Baluska's journal, the Communicative and Integrative Biology, on the question that probably something very similar to the question we'll be discussing today about determining the relevance of realizing relevance, you know, from the broad world into a subjective significance for an organism. So I also mentioned that I have a website, talkingoctopus.com, where I've tried to imagine some of the consequences of taking biological agency seriously and some of the experiments that we might do to shed more light on the question.
Fabulous. Do you want to introduce yourself, Stu?
Yeah, I'm an old man.
Well, Stu doesn't need much of an introduction, but
Okay.
Well, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I am an old man. It's true. That's actually true. Go ahead, Kate.
He's a pretty cool old man.
I'm a cool old man.
Well, my name's Katherine Peil Kauffmann, and I've been thinking about the emotional system walking backwards from clinical psychology for about 35 years now. It's really great to meet you all. How do you pronounce your first name? Frantisek?
Frantisek.
Frantisek. That's beautiful. Frantisek.
Exactly.
It's wonderful to meet you. I've seen your name on Papers with Mike Levin, and it thrills me no end that so many people are beginning to pick up the strands of the importance of embodied sentience and the role that it plays, the functional role that it played early on in life, and how it remains intimately connected with all other regulatory systems, including genetics, epigenetics, and immunity. And it really changes everything we think we know about so many things that we take for granted in our cultural lexicon that are really not right. So I'm thrilled about what we might be able to talk about today and how to move it forward.
So actually, I do have things
Nice
to
to
say.
meet you, Wayne.
Yeah. So
Yes, Catherine, we've spoken on Facebook Messenger and stuff, but it's very nice to see you guys in person.
Tell us a little about yourself as well.
Well, let's see. So my background is in biology, mathematics, and physics. I've been interested in these kind of questions probably since before reading Stu's first book in 1993. So I'm interested in agency, cognition, and evolution and where they coincide. Very much along, I've never really bought the modern synthesis. And I don't know. I don't even know where to begin. I'm not a professional academic. I was briefly. I've kind of an eclectic history. Everyone in this, well, most of the people quoted in this paper are bodies of work that I've been following for quite a while. I'm kind of unhappy with the way Mike Levin is treated in this paper because it really isn't a fair assessment. It's far more nuanced than that. And when he uses the word computation, he's talking about something much more general than something that could be implemented in the von Neumann architecture. It's sort of closer to sort of input-output context, some kind of irreducible triadic computation, perhaps in the way Tim Eastman or someone like that might mean. I mean, I know, Stu, you wrote a paper with Mike Epperson and with Katherine. So Tim uses that work as part of an overall framework called the Logi framework. I think is actually kind of appropriate for this kind of stuff. But anyway, this was an introduction. I'll shut up.
So can I, I may be the oldest person, but anyway, if it's okay with you guys, can I take us back to early issues about agency that I was involved in the mid-90s, leaving out Howard Pattee and Robert Rosen and all of that earlier work, which I think is brilliant. So I found myself wondering in the mid-1990s, what does something have to be an agent? And I hadn't the faintest idea what would answer that. And I got this far. I've had for many, many years the idea of the spontaneous emergence of collectively autocatalytic sets. So that is something I published in 1971. They are autopoietic systems. It's a set of molecules that's non-equilibrium. It's being fed from the outside by parts, and the parts catalyze the reactions, making the part, so it's collectively autocatalytic. So I had the idea of autocatalysis, and of course I knew the idea of autopoiesis that had come up later. And I struggled with the idea of a work cycle, and I struggled to understand it. Well, it's not a new idea, and it comes with a puzzle. I'd like to get it out because I think it really bears on everything we're talking about. And so here I am writing this book about work cycles, and an author on the second law, I will remember his name in a moment because I always do, said, what's work? Well, work is force acting through a distance. And it's Atkins, yeah. Atkins says, no, work's much more interesting. It's the constrained release of energy into a few degrees of freedom. So what's that? Well, it's a cannon, which is the boundary condition constraint. And there's some powder at the base of the cannon, and a cannonball just beyond the powder. So when you explode the powder, the constraint, which is the boundary condition of the cannon, constrains the explosion. You don't get a spherical wave, and work is done to blast the cannonball down the cannon. And so I said, okay, I understand that. And then I'm not being a physicist, so I asked a new question. I sort of wondered, where did the cannon come from? See, Newton never tells us where the boundary conditions come from, right? That's the free choice of the physicist. And, you know, we were all around at the Big Bang, and there weren't any cannons. So where did the cannon come from? Well, it obviously took work to make the cannon. So you get to a funny cycle that I didn't know how to solve. It's no constraints on the release of energy, no work. Do you get to no work, no constraints on the release of energy? Well, that sounds a little too strong, but obviously it took work to make the cannon. So at least some of the times it takes work to make the cannon. Now what? And then I realized that if you do work to make the cannon, that work can construct constraints. And that was in 2000, and I was stuck. And the fundamental step that is so profound, I think, is in the notion of constraint closure that we all know about, that Mosio and Motteville came up with in 2015. And it's one of these truly exquisite transformative ideas. And it's wonderful. It's their idea. So let me just say it. I want to get some work, so I need some non-equilibrium processes, process 1, 2, and 3. But I need some constraints, A, B, and C. So here's their idea. A constrains the release of energy in process 1, and it constructs a B. B constrains the release of energy in process 2, and it constructs a C. C constrains the release of energy in process 3, and it constructs an A. Now, pause and if you haven't already heard it, really take it in. This is magical. This is a system that has some constraints on the release of energy. The constraints are boundary conditions. And what the boundary conditions do is they constrain the release of energy to construct the very same boundary conditions. A, B, and C constrain the release of energy to construct A, B, and C. The system literally constructs itself because itself is a bunch of things that are boundary conditions. And this is just transformative. It's their idea. I think it's amazing. So we construct automobiles, and they have lots of parts that are constrained and release energy. And the wheels turn when the motors turn over. Our automobiles don't construct their own constraints. Cells do. So to put it together, I got so thrilled. Take my beloved autocatalytic sets or an autopoietic system. This is also Terry Deacon's second order constraints. So you've got a set of peptides, and each peptide catalyzes a reaction making some other peptide so that all the peptides make one another. Well, the peptides are enzymes. They are constraints on the release of energy, but they're the very same things that are the constraints on the release that get constructed. So Gonan Ashkenazi has a 9-peptide autocatalytic set, and it constructs itself. It's autopoietic, and it does so, and it achieves 3 closures. It achieves catalytic closure. Everything, I think that's the notion of organizational closure that we're comfortable with. But it also achieves constraint closure. So let's just pause and say it. What Gonan's set does is each peptide ligates 2 half fragments of the next peptide and binds them in place. So peptide 1 is acting as a boundary condition constraint that by binding the 2 half fragments of peptide 2 holds them in space and orients them so it lowers the activation barrier, and energy is released in a particular way, and work is done to construct the second peptide. It really is. And peptide 2 does it to 3, and 3 does it to 4 and around, then 9 does it to 1. It achieves exactly constraint closure. It's a good idea to put the thing into some sort of boundary region like a liposome, so it doesn't diffuse over the Atlantic. And I'd like to introduce the idea that is missing in the paper that we're reading. It's almost there. Do you all know the notion of a Kantian hole?
Mhm.
Let me just say, okay, this is Kant's idea in 1790. And he said in German, an organized being has the property that the parts exist for and by means of the whole. So we're all Kantian wholes. We exist.
That's implicit in this paper.
Huh?
I think it's a lot of it that's implicit here. In the paper. So when you look
No,
at
yeah, it is implicit in the paper. Absolutely, it's there, just not quite explicitly said. So in Gonan Ashkenazi's peptide set, each peptide gets to exist because it's part of the whole autocatalytic set. But the whole autocatalytic set gets to exist because it's made up of the particles, right? So Gonan's set is a Kantian whole. An autopoietic set in general is a Kantian whole. So it's a Kantian hole that achieves catalytic closure and constraint closure, and let's put it in a liposome. And we're all Kantian holes, right? We exist because we've got livers and kidneys and spleens, and they exist because they're in us. Couple of other immediate consequences are selection acts at the level of the whole, not the parts. The function of a part is that subset of its causal properties that sustains the whole. The function of your heart is to pump blood, not make heart sounds. So this is so fundamental. Given the notion of a Kantian whole, we really can't define the function of a part. We just did. It's that subset of causal properties that sustains the whole. And the function of a part is an affordance that has been seized by, in this case, heritable variation and natural selections. So it's exactly the dialectic process that allows open-ended evolution, right, that's in the paper. And then we get to the central topics of this paper, which is essentially it's affordance realization. It's how does the organism, how does it find new affordances in the world?
Just ignore what I'm doing.
Can we get them back?
They're here. I'm just, sorry, there's something going on with my email.
Can we get that done?
Just go ahead and talk because they can see you.
Yeah, okay.
I'll try to close this.
Maybe can make it big. So look, you guys, I think that then gets into this wonderful paper. And it's all about realization of relevance. And relevance, as we're all saying in this paper, is relevance to me, the Kantian whole. It's relevant to me because there are features of the world that are relevant to me. And I think this paper is exactly right. That's the task. How is it that organisms, I want to say one more thing after that. How is it that we find that which is relevant? That's the non-computational part. And my way of trying to say that it's not computational, then I'll shut up, is I have fun with Andrea Rowley talking about the fact that what can you use an object for? So the toy example is an engine block, and engine blocks are great because you can use them as a paperweight. And then my triumph was to say, yeah, but you can also use the sharp corners of an engine block to crack open a coconut. I mean, they're just affordances of an engine block, right? But you cannot deduce from the fact that you're using an engine block as a paperweight, you cannot deduce that you can use it to crack open coconuts. And that means that in evolution, finding novel affordances, finding relevant feature, which is meaning making, can't be deduced, which means it's not a computation, which is a sort of another cut into this whole wonderful paper. I'm about to shut up. So I think the paper that we're talking about is superb. I think the artificial intelligence people are going to hate it. I know they're going to hate it because they're wrong.
That's the strong AI people, maybe, but there's a lot of nuance in that community actually too. Like Adam, for instance, who unfortunately couldn't make it. I feel like, so in order to get to relevance realization, I don't feel like the Kantian whole is quite enough. I mean, I think we really need to bring in, to Deacon, Harara, and talk about meta constraints and constraints that, so not only are the constraints mutually self-constructing, which certainly they are, but they also are mutually self-reinforcing many times. So Terry wrote a paper called Complexity and Dynamical Depth with a biophilosopher, Koutrophinis. Really pretty interesting. And what they talk about in that paper is, his basic teleodynamic idea, where you have these two mutually reinforcing constraints, but you can scale that up, where you have teleodynamic systems mutually reinforcing each other and forming a meta constraint. So one of the arguments is that the fundamental normativity of continuing this process is itself kind of the first example of one of these meta constraints, if that makes sense to people.
Well, yeah, the paper says it. Life gets on with getting on.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
I think that what we're all moving toward is something in addition to all of the beautiful closures. We got operational closure, organizational closure, constraint closure, catalytic closure. This closure, yeah, is really central to what a Kantian whole is and how it operates, with both bottom-up processes and top-down processes that essentially mediates the relationship abstractly between parts and wholes. I think that's where we're going to find some of the most fruitful paths. But also, too, walking back from psychology with frustration in that the physicists haven't given us any theory at all to discuss things like identity, information, really, agency, personhood, let alone, I mean, what it is to be a person, let alone what can go wrong with a person. So all of those things are of interest to us. And I'm right on board with Evan Thompson and the whole idea of the blind spot, and that we need to get the subject back into the story. So I'm going to start there. And I think what we need to add is the concept of information closure, because there is signaling involved. There are energy processes that have been harnessed for very important stimulus signals. And in my work, I talked about, I used the language of feedback function to talk about this. And it was the best I could find back in, 2012, 2014. But Mike Levin's work, when I discovered that, I realized, oh my God, he's talking about bioelectricity. That's a completely different layer of stimulus that undergirds the chemistry that I was pointing to in terms of the sensory motor equipment in the machinery, if you will, in the bacterium. And it's always had, I guess I'm coming to this concept of the agent in the machine, the self in the machine, because the machinery does have some small place for agency. And I find it really frustrating that really brilliant psychologists are basically suggesting we don't have any free will, and we need to start realizing that. We start with free will as a given and look about what that might mean. And certainly we have machinery that's beautiful. I mean, everything other than my consciousness that looks out onto my external environment is happening at all of these other beautiful levels within me. I don't have to think about it. It's so cool. All of my little parts are doing exactly what they need to do. All I need to do is look out subjectively into my environment and give them feedback that constrains. And that to me is really central to this. It gets at the idea of the structure of identity. What do we mean by boundaries? And that stimulus signal is actually the overlapping boundaries. So I think that's where the real fruit of this discussion is going to lead. And the all of the questions in AI are really bringing everyone right up to the brink of what I've been trying to point out for a long time. And I'm really happy to hear it. And I really encourage you youngsters and anybody that's not an academic, you know what? You are a scientist by virtue of your personal experiences. And my newest pathway, you know, banging my head and trying to communicate this in so many ways, is to ground all of this new science directly in experience, first person experience. And I tend to the kind of natural spirituality. So I'm going to be stepping away from the authority of science, and I want you guys to take all of the great science and run with it, please. So there's no pride of authorship or anything, but I think when you factor the emotional system back in and what it's doing, and you look at when it emerged, there is something that's really beautiful that's missing from this article. It's all over the place.
Catherine, can you post in the chat a link to your paper, Emotion, the Self-Regulatory Sense?
Oh,
I think folks should read it.
Yeah, of course.
I'm actually pretty conversant with this in terms of the way the systems are organized and the way sort of these sort of biocybernetic aspects are embodied, right?
And what I wanted to throw out just was this idea, and in fact, I've spoken with Yogi about it, who's one of the authors of the paper in the past in discussions we've had. And it's the idea that there is a fundamental semantic information bit that creatures are using to organize their environment, to define their selves, and that is pleasure and pain. It's affect, and that's what we've gotten wrong. And there's so much confusion about it still, even in psychology. You know, like the owners of it, because it's a biological system. So if you drop in the idea that there is information processing, no matter how minor, but that there's this fundamental semantic information bit that tells the organism, first of all, emotion is always about the self. It's a self-relevant stream of information that's woven together with cognition, but it is separate. And in fact, it came first. So if you recognize the two different things, then you're already on your way. But that it's always about the self, and it always moves to action. So this is Damasio's and Joseph Ledoux's work, but that it's always about the self. And so this self-regulatory function helps us understand what it asks the question, okay, what is a self? What is identity? How is it structured? How much behavior is hardwired? All of that. And you're off and running. So I think when you drop this back into the pool, you have that fifth E, which is emotion, but you don't necessarily need the story about acceptation because it's been there all along. And it's that fundamental semantic information bit that runs the show. It gives you the signal, it gives you the response, and it feeds back and builds the memory structures, the categories of good for me, bad for me, that set down all learning, Pavlovian learning, and later associative learning. So that's what I wanted to throw into the mix here in this discussion.
Yeah, I mean, from my interpretation of the paper, I mean, by the way, John, who's the author that I'm closest to, talks about a lot of the things you talked about in other work, and he does call emotion the fifth E actually, and he calls acceptation.
And he adds the sixth one. Thank you for sending. I just want you to know you've turned me on to a lot of really cool people. I wasn't aware of his work, but I sent him a message because I think there's a way of feeding this together for a really powerful, simple message.
Yeah, I think so too. It definitely fits in, and when it comes to communicating it, I think the tie-in with emotion is actually going to help actually, above and beyond the actual science.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, we totally need it in what's happening. Oh my God.
it's your exact experience. I mean,
on the role of positive and negative emotion and what's going on politically.
what you'll find in this space is, I've talked to, a lot of people in this space and corresponded almost to a person. One of the deepest things we're all concerned about, regardless of our individual sort of streams of work, is the meaning collapse and the collapse of our ecosystems and the collapse of society and
there are values. Science has never looked at values, and religion has had that. They've owned that. But values come from emotion, from the fundamental semantic information bit. And that's the thing we have to reacquaint everyone with, because otherwise other people can push your emotional buttons and be in your OODA loop. We have examples of that all over the place yesterday in America, for sure.
Well, let someone else jump in there because we're monopolizing the conversation.
I have a question to ask. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So this paper, I maybe have an eccentric reading of this paper. Because when I follow the central question, to me, it's, how do organisms select the problems they're solving? Okay. And if I take this framework of autopoiesis or Kantian whole perspective on the question, then I say, okay, so they select these problems based on what's good for their own survival and reproduction, that their perspective is then informed by natural selection. That becomes incompatible with agency for me, because if it's informed by natural selection, it means it's informed by an inheritance, right? And so
yeah. So one thing I would say about that, I don't want to. I see where you're going. Is, I mean, I think a lot of us here, this kind of simple-minded conception of natural selection with random mutations, sort of changes, and it's been, originally it was abstract genes, so these abstract heritability units, which is actually better than short stretches of DNA, which is just quite frankly nonsense. But just because the iterative evolutionary process has an effect on what's possible, it doesn't mean that the organism has no agency. Mike Levin's work, for instance, shows that the organism has a lot of real agency in real time that has really nothing to do at all with genetic heritability.
Right. So, that's the paradox for me of this paper. So if I'm trying to understand the world, that's a different aim from trying to survive and reproduce in the world. And
really, how could you do one without the other?
Well, there are many cases where they're not compatible. I mean, for example, in most developed countries, we're below replacement rate, in terms of reproduction. And that's because we pursued all these other human aims. And where did those aims come from? Like, why are we pursuing the activities that we're engaged in, if not to reproduce ourselves? And so there's no version of an individual that can be informed by natural selection, because an individual, so survival and reproduction is not in their cognitive domain. I mean, an individual can't receive a signal from natural selection in order to learn from it, because you only live one life. You only survive or don't survive one time. You only reproduce at one rate over your lifetime. And so, to me, cognition and agency have to be entirely disconnected from natural selection and from the aim of survival and reproduction. Doesn't mean they're incompatible with it, right? So you could be pursuing this other aim of understanding the world and by chance become a system that's capable of survival and reproduction.
I think what you're getting, so here's the issue. So if you're thinking about this from a process perspective, right? You get a little different take on it. It seems like you're sort of thinking about it in discrete time steps, where as process, the species is a contiguous process, which goes all the way back to the beginning of the universe. Really, although I don't know if I'm addressing this properly. You look like you want to say something, so let me think.
Charlie, can I add in something that may be helpful, please?
Absolutely.
Andrea Rowley and I wrote a paper with the brave title, What is Consciousness? And we got to it in a strange way. We were building on the idea that when you're jury-rigging, namely you're finding a novel affordance, you're finding the fact that it's a great idea that you can use the engine block not as a paperweight, we can use it to crack open the coconut. So begin with the fact that that's not a deductive step. And now we human beings carry out jury rigging that are multiple steps. The famous case is not the Challenger disaster, but the other one, where there was 19 steps to fix something on the rocket ship, right? Which I don't remember the disaster. Anyway, they fixed the thing. So how do we do a 19-step jury rig when no step can be deduced from the other steps? So hold the problem in mind. We have an idea of combinatorial optimization in programming and all over the place. And typically you're climbing on a landscape and you know if you're getting better or not, right? Now, suppose that you're doing a multi-step jury rig and you don't know that your 7-step jury rig is going to work because you can't deduce any of the steps from any of the other steps. You can't see that it's going to work until you get all the steps, okay? Until you glimpse the solution. That means that, and I can make it more concrete, that means that there's no local clue in the process of doing the 7-step jury rigging that you're getting any better. There's no success criteria.
Unless you have emotional feedback.
That won't do it, Kate.
What
No,
what about anticipatory systems?
No, let me just sort of say it.
Don't get into
You'd have the emotional feedback, you'd have to know that you're getting better. And in a multi-step jury rig, you don't know that you're getting better till you have the whole solution. So the question is how do we do it? And so Andrea makes robots, and we thought, well, what about robots? So we sort of conceptually imagined a robot that has an engine block, and what it has to do is it's use its arms. It's got to figure out how to crack open a coconut. And the robot can sort of kick around the engine block and find that it can move it and tilt it. There's no way that the robot can figure out the 7-step thing to do. It has to manipulate this actual object to find out what will happen because it can't be deduced. And what we got to is the robot would rust to death before it could solve the 7-step problem. That means something important. If humans, because we have minds, and this is getting to your point, Charlie, because we have minds, can find the non-deducible 7-step pathway, it would be of enormous selective advantage. So we jump to mind is quantum. It entangles with the world.
Well, Tim, what's
We collapse the wave function, and we see, we have a qualia, which is a glimpse of the total solution.
It's possible.
And that's how we do it. And it's not obvious how we do it otherwise. Dean Radin's work, I don't know if you've seen it, he's shown with his colleagues that we can try to collapse the wave function in the 2-slit experiment. It's a very weak effect, but averaged over a large number of people, the effect is now at 6.49 sigma. So the physicists aren't looking at it all, not surprisingly.
A lot of this stuff's quoted in Tim Eastman's book in one of the chapters.
Yeah, no, look, it's really neat. And Dean is so brave and so honest and so conservative. 6.49 sigma means that it would come up by chance 1 in 400 billion times. They're cheap experiments. They're extraordinary claims. So let's have it done lots of times. So it's, 23 sigma or something.
Yeah, sounds like good.
Mind plays a role in the becoming of the universe, and it's quantum, and classical computers aren't. And that ties in with the dream that Andre and I have. We really can do multi-step jury rigging. And it's not obvious how a classical system can do it. So we've tried to find something that we can do that a computer can't do.
So, but multi-step jury rigging, if I understand your example correctly, it involves an understanding of what you're jury rigging, right? So it implies that you have some sort of
Problem.
implies the salience of the whatever objects or forces you're using to construct your jury rig. The salience of those is independent of whether they enhance your survival and reproduction. So
Yeah.
sort of like epistemic curiosity that has to be independently derived somehow, which means your like whole ontogeny has to be somehow independently derived, because if everything that makes you a whole self is derived from natural selection, then it can only see
But it is.
things that have been signaled to it from that process, right? I mean, it has to be somehow signaled to the organism through some different process.
Well, two things though here I want to put. It seems like you're thinking about things in terms of conscious cognition.
I think so, yeah.
How can a human being, and that's not really what we're talking about generally in this paper. We're talking.
No, I know it's not, but I'm coming to Charlie's point.
Yeah, me too.
Was that if it's natural selection, we don't have to think about cognition because it's just natural selection and you've got a working flagellum, right?
Right.
Yep.
Like emotions don't really exist in that conception of an organism.
Right.
Like emotions are not causal forces, because emotions come from the world around us. They don't come from natural selection. Like they're independently derived somehow from the world. And if they have causal power, then it means they sort of override it. There's no question natural selection's instructing our body somehow, right? We have genes, like we have inherited nucleotides.
But again, I'm sorry to interrupt, but on natural selection, though, I mean, there's a lot of reasons to believe that what's kind of generally thought of as natural selection is far from the only important force that's going on in evolution, in evolutionary dynamics. And really, if you ask me, it's actually, although powerful, it's a fairly modest player. There's a lot going on in evolution that has nothing to do with random mutation and heritability in the germplasm. A lot of it has absolutely nothing to do with it.
Well, when
somewhere else, right? I mean, it has to.
It does, and there's a bunch of different ways that have been, that have already been. There's a lot of work that's been done in these areas. I mean, so the first, I forgot the name. I think it was Phillips. Was talking about the extended evolutionary synthesis, and there you see a bunch of different, to use the word I maybe don't want to use, mechanisms. Whereby evolution proceeds in ways that have nothing really to do with natural selection. As would be
right, like I'm sure Daniel could speak too. I mean, there's transposition, there's symbiogenesis, there's
niche construction, there's developmental niche construction, plasticity, there's
right,
the Baldwin effect,
right,
various.
So what I'm saying is that those things that are manipulating the genome, they have to take place in a sense for emotional reasons. Like they have to be selected from all the possible activities of an organism. Their relevance has to be present to the organism in order for the organism to spontaneously duplicate its genome or rearrange its genome or combine with another organism to produce another, lineage in evolution. It has to do that for a reason. Like there has to be some relevance to that activity for the organism that's totally independent of what the genes are instructing the organism to whatever extent the genes are instructing the organism, because we're talking about manipulating the genes. So it has to come from some other mechanistic source. If we're gonna have
I mean, just look at, like, we're not always talking about manipulating genes at all. I mean, so if you take a developmental systems kind of point of view, you know, where really what's going on in evolution, what's being inherited is a robust yet flexible life cycle. You know, part of that in terms of the Kantian whole is the genome and the transcriptional processes and the post-stranded translational processes and the modification processes. They're all sort of tools in the toolbox. Now, you know, so if you take the genes or the DNA outside of the cell, they're just a gooey bunch of mess that really have no significance at all. In the context of a cell and the milieu of the cell and its transjective connections to its environment that it's immersed in, they have real meaning. You know, they do things, but
right.
It's easy to get confused with sort of like a selfish gene kind of idea here, because, you know, for decades we've been overemphasizing, you know, how important the DNA actually is, even though it is important.
I was wondering if I can go back to Stu's point about moving to step 7, where a robot's trying to figure out what's going on here. And it seems like we're talking a little bit more about the difference between algorithmic discrete sort of systems versus continuous analog systems. And you were mentioning about bringing in some notion of quantum processes in there, which I think really gets at that continuous sort of perspective on it. You know, when in this paper, they're talking about computational in terms of algorithmic, and they're really hammering on that as opposed to maybe a broader conception where Mike Levin would talk about, you know, more of he has a very broad conception of mechanism, right? And so we're looking at that difference between mechanism and organism, discrete and continuous versus, and so on. And I'm wondering if that is the difference between the ability to infer or anticipate the ability to move from one step to the next. If that makes a difference.
Can I try something on you guys that Andre and I got too?
Yeah.
So all the discussions about digital computers.
Mm-hmm.
You're right, but there are analog computers, right? So Andre and I started wondering, well, could an analog computer, a classical, here's the way we pose, could it be that we're talking about classical physics analog computers? Can they do jury rigging? And our step is, well, no, they cannot, because affordances are possible uses of things.
Yes.
So a possible use of an engine block is to crack open a coconut. Another possible use of an engine block is to make an engine. Another possible use of an engine block is as a paperweight. And classical physical systems fulfill Aristotle's law of contradiction, no contradiction.
Yes, exactly.
And the excluded middle. So an analog computer is a classical physical system, and it cannot represent potentia. It can't. It's true or false. But potentia, possible uses, are not true or false, because Peirce is right. Actuals and probables are true or false. Possibles are not true or false. So we make the step, I'll just say it, well, sorry, if affordances are possibles and they're neither true nor false, they're both and, they're like superpositions, then it can never be represented by an analog computer that has to be isomorphic to what it computes. You know,
I have a question along these lines too, because this is something I'm struggling with. You know, so I'm fully on board with Epperson and we're really kind of what Ruth Kastner is talking about also in terms of sort of like a pre-space quantum potential, universe of quantum potential where their law of excluded middle and non-contradiction actually doesn't apply. But, you know, when you think about, you know, your notion of the adjacent possible, and you can go to like Auxier and Huxley's book called Quantum of Explanation, on the classical level, right? I'll give the example you use. Let's say I agree to meet you at a coffee shop in Santa Fe next week at 3 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. However,
it's downtown subscription, to be precise.
Right, but the place gets blown up, and now this is no longer a possibility. So it seems to me that even at the classical level, although not in terms of deductive physics, something you could do with dynamical systems, the possibilities really are changing non-locally in real time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Do you agree with it? I mean, the basic idea is when it's really true that the downtown subscription closes or blows up, that is a new actual fact about the world.
So it is actuality.
Yeah, well, it's an actual fact. It closed, and it really changes what's next possible. We really can't meet there. But nothing causal happened to change the possibilities. Furthermore, if they rapidly rebuilt downtown subscription, it would again be possible for us to meet there. And so changing actuals change what's next possibles.
So it really does come down to the non-Boolean algebra at the bottom, essentially. It really just
and that's the superpositions, right?
Can I throw in something? I want to hear from everyone that's been silent.
Yeah, here's someone. I wasn't really.
I think there's a consideration about time here, because I'm fully on board with Stu's story of res potentia and res extensa, and we followed it up pretty carefully. And I'm working on a story using the metaphor of a Tao, because we do experience two different realms and there. But when you're really talking about putting the agent back in the story, it becomes the whole story of evolution has to really rethink the time scales involved. And the idea here is that of biological relativity that comes from Dennis Noble, but I think it's bigger than that. I mean, it's a whole new way of thinking about relativity in terms of time and space, because the subjective observer becomes the only real anchor to what that is factually in how everything works. So it basically suggests that evolution has been going on every time scale, right here, right now, since the beginning. And that's my point about the semantic information bit being that steerage, that guidance that we need. But it emphasizes what hasn't come into the conversation so much yet is way back at the beginning, when you're talking about literally the dance between parts and wholes, there is an impulse of adaptability and creative novelty making in the process, both at the level of the parts and the level of wholes, but mostly at the level of parts. And so it's not just one survival and reproduction, it's adaptation as well. And adaptation takes in everything from learning of the immune response to the epigenetic responses to the stress hormones and the external environmental conditions. So we really need to expand the evolutionary story where there's right here, right now selection going on by the behavioral agency and the decision-making and the intelligence of living systems. And that started out as a simple binary, but it's also based, I'm a huge believer in quantum biology. So you have, in res extensa, you have time and space, which is relative to each entity, but that in res potentia, it is beyond time and space, and there's a different kind of informational pattern forming, really interesting mathematics going on there, but that
total logic.
So you have a both and logic of the quantum world that's happening at the lowest level, at the smallest level of scale in time and space, but it's still happening right here, right now. And thankfully, every atom and molecule and cell in my body is doing that work, because so it liberates me to do my job as just looking at, so to me, it's all about the boundary and how that is defined and how we take in information about ourselves, because that is how we're constructing our autopoietic identity. And it's completely enmeshed with the others in the environment. And there are feels to it.
Yeah, I think that hierarchical sort of perspective really might be key to this difference that we're looking at here. in terms of parts and wholes, in terms of generating constraints, of course, with the teleodynamics and so on. So thank you for adding that.
Where do you guys see? I mean, mostly we're referring to the paper by Yogi and Dennis Walsh. Dennis has done just amazing things. Where do you guys see the major questions now?
Well, I've written some of them in this thread, which hopefully people get somewhere.
I apologize. We have not seen that, or we'd probably.
I'll send it to you individually.
Thanks.
But God, I just forgot what I was going to say.
Well,
I was asking you, where does it go?
Oh, there it is.
I mean, we've already kind of opened up a bunch of interesting themes. But there's some folks that didn't make this particular session that were invited. Richard, I guess, couldn't make it for some reason. And there's also some folks that are here that we haven't really heard much from. So, I've already clarified some of my questions from this discussion. I think Charlie still hasn't, he's still struggling with certain issues that he doesn't see as congruent. But what is was it Dennis? I think we haven't heard from. I've questions been raised for you here that.
Daniel.
You're referring to me, maybe? Daniel?
Yeah. He's talking about Daniel.
Yeah, so I suppose I should explain myself. So I think I've said so little because, and this is natural, I suppose, this was a long paper which covers a lot of ground. And there was scarcely a moment when I was reading this paper when I didn't have in mind the concrete example of an E. coli trying to solve the problem of a changing food source. So the paper is making an argument about something which should apply to all of the living world. So I was thinking, okay, my brain doesn't move very fast. Let's pick the simplest case scenario we could possibly go with. A single bacteria with a changing food source. How does it solve this problem? So the paper makes a few arguments. One is that whilst it looks like this is an automatic, responsive, input-output, machine-like solution, it's actually not that. When the E. coli cell is solving this problem, one, it's doing it agentially. It's having ownership of that decision, we might say. And second of all, and many others as well, it gets more complicated. It does this in a non-computational manner. So I was on board with it for the agential part, which I read as it essentially says, okay, it's got these genes turning on and off, which allows the organism to digest lactose rather than glucose. That's fine. It looks very much like a logic gate, something computational. But it's in control of this, and the reason why is because it's a self-constructing, self-organizing entity, and therefore, by virtue of constructing itself, constructing the materials and the rules which will allow it to solve that problem, it has ownership of the solution which it comes up with, even if it looks somewhat computational. So that was fine. But when I was then thinking of, actually, we know what the lac operon looks like, and we can model it very, very much like a simple logic gate. Why would that not be computational? And I struggled with why that wouldn't be computational. It looks almost exactly like a simple logic gate. So I was on board very much, at least for the simple example of an E. coli. Everything else that was said in this discussion of, why things aren't computational, the role of emotions, the role of jerry-rigging and so on, fine. But why the lac operon being switched on and off to solve that problem seems very computational to me.
Well, it's not just the lac operon, though, right? Because the bacterium has to move one way or another. And by the way, when you deal with something as simple as a bacteria that, it has a relatively small affordance landscape, you may even oversimplify things because, there is the cognitive glue problem where, you get some very simple processes in paramecium and E. coli that, you know, they can probably be simulated pretty damn close with a computational system. But once you're dealing
Dennis,
with
go ahead, Kate.
I just wanted to throw out there that one of the big inconsistencies or incompletenesses where there can be a jumping off point is that they are throwing out computation, digital computation, as Daniel points out, but that they come back full circle to rely on opponent processing. Okay.
Yeah.
And that is the meat of where the machine meets with the informational energy, free energy use of the system that we're getting at.
And when you're dealing with opponent processing, sorry to just interject real quick, this is where the possibility space becomes important, right? Because when you have these processes that are opponent processes that are either sometimes in trade-off relations, sometimes both and, sometimes they're mutually reinforcing, which is more teleodynamic. Now you're dealing with non-Boolean logic, right? Once you're dealing with non-Boolean logic where the excluded middle does not apply and the law of non-contradiction doesn't apply, at least when the anticipation is going on, say, you know, when you're talking about the anticipatory aspect of it, that can't be done on a binary or a Boolean processor. That's where the issue comes up right now.
I think something is going over my head.
Dennis, it's Daniel. Look, can I bring in some things here? Thing one, Wayne, I'm working with a colleague in India. Ancient Vedic philosophy has a notion that we don't have in Aristotle. It's the unmanifest, which is essentially possible. It's potentia, and it gives rise to a logic with 7 mutually exclusive statements that cover most of the mysteries in quantum mechanics. But it does not have the law. So Sudeep's just worked it out with another guy. So it doesn't have the law of excluded middle. So there is a refurbishing of a 2,500-year-old logic from a Jain philosopher. Because that seems really interesting to me, and Sudeep knows what he's talking about. And that bears, Daniel, on the Boolean behavior, which I fell in love with many years ago, of a bunch of lactose and a bunch of operons, and they are a computation. Why not? Okay, and so I invented random Boolean nets a long time ago as models of genetic regularity, and those are certainly computations, right? They just click on and off. So another way of getting beyond computations is precisely the notion of an affordance and a Darwinian pre-adaptation and exaptation. And it rests on the idea that any molecule has indefinitely many affordances. So here's the molecule in the cell, and it's busy being the inducer for the lac operon, or it's busy being the repressor or something else in the lac operon. Well, who says that repressor can't become part of another molecule and carry a tension load?
It does.
So now it carries a tension load, and the function of that protein is entirely different from its prior function. Well, we couldn't deduce that new function, and so that's not a computation. So in the exaptation, let's draw a distinction between the synchronic dynamics of the system and the diachronic evolution of the system. So my view is that we can safely say the evolution of ever novel functions where the same molecule or structure comes to have a different use because the function of a part is that subset of its causal properties that supports the whole. So the same part can come to have a different causal property. And that was Darwin's idea. And that's not a computation because it's not deducible. And if we agree with that, then evolution is not a deductive process. Therefore, it's not an entailed process. Therefore, there is no law for the evolution of the biosphere, and the evolution of the biosphere is not an entailed deduction. So, in other words, if we step beyond the behavior of the system as constituted, which is what you're struggling with, to the evolution of the system where, some molecule that was an enzyme becomes a crystalline in the eye and it's transparent, we can't deduce that. So the evolution of the biosphere, I think, is clearly not entailed by any law. It's a different issue whether or not the synchronic behavior of a cell can be. I don't think I have to say that.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a very clear way of putting it, and I certainly subscribe to what you just said. However, I would say that the paper, it at least words things as if the system itself, in solving the problem at hand, is also non-computational, or at least for that lac operon example, it seems to me to be near enough computational.
One of the things...
Yeah, so that's it. So let me just say one more thing. So the synchronic description for the cell as a molecular dynamical system, it's a nonlinear dynamical system, right? And if you want to say, therefore, it's a computation, it's a computation. So either one pathway to non-computation is a classical object, like a protein, evolves a new function. And another one that may be sufficient is, with our mind, we are able to jury-rig. We can fashion, in the good English sense of to fashion some thingamajig that's got lots of parts. And since none of those steps can be deduced, it's not a deduction. So we don't do it as a general Turing machine.
Let me briefly bring in.
I'm sorry, I must leave now because I have something urgent to organize. So maybe we can meet another time. And I
well,
like to
Charles will set it up for sure. Yeah.
I'm sorry today I must leave earlier. So have a nice day.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Baluska.
Thank you, Dr. Baluska. It
Bye-bye.
was very nice to meet you. Sorry we monopolized the conversation so much, really.
No, I think this is a very captivating conversation.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that from Mike Levin's experimental work really brings out, and this is empirical work, is that not only is acceptation and novelty of use going on generationally in evolution, it's going on in real time in actual organisms all the time, which is one very good pointer to the non-computational aspect. Another thing I would point out is that
I think that's in his xenobots, right?
Yeah, well, it's in planaria, it's in everything he works with, including, believe it or not, even including some very simple algorithms, which I think that was the paper that Adam was involved in. So you have really non-computational processes of radical emergence going on, even synchronically, if by synchronic you're sort of blocking time up into these time steps that are like an organism lifespan rather than some kind of durée. Experiential durée is another issue.
The point I'm hearing that y'all are making that makes a lot of sense to me is that I'm hearing you guys say that the origin of a new use, like an acceptation, okay, like we're talking about really, I think, to follow Daniel's comparison, I think we're really talking about the recognition of a novel food source by an E. coli bacterium it's never been eaten before in the history of life, right? So it's the recognition of something entirely novel as useful is the case we're saying, and we're saying in saying an organism is not computational, we're just simply observing that novel use is not a result of the internal mechanical logic of the organism. It has to have its origin somewhere else. The knowledge, the information that's added to the algorithmic system, such as it is, has to come from the unfolding of physical reality in the moment.
clarify something that's been implicit here, but hasn't actually really been discussed. When you talk about function, or you talk about affordance, although really affordance is a transjective relationship, it isn't actually a thing. But so when you're talking about a use or a novel use or what use, this is a radically context dependent.
Absolutely.
Right. What's going on with formal logic and a Boolean computer is completely devoid of context.
It's devoid of context. Yeah, it's totally syntactic.
Well, that was my point about biological relativity.
Yeah, now I didn't quite follow exactly what you meant. Now I do.
But I think you could construct, nevertheless, I think you could construct something with, I'm not sure all of the consequences of Boolean logic, but I think you could construct an algorithmic machine that nevertheless was sensitive to its context. I mean, I don't see why that would be physically impossible.
Well, but that's sort of that.
Hang on, Charlie, you can. And let me quote my colleague Andrea: "Make it a robot." Okay, and people make robots. What I learned from Andrea is the computer and the robot. The computer has an ontology of objects. And it can calculate any combinations of the properties of the objects that are already in its ontology. And it can go bump things in the world, which can't happen if it's not an embodied robot. But it cannot get outside of the combinations of things inside of its ontology. So a non-embodied robot can't innovate. It's locked in its world. It's syntactic. If it can bump the world, it can invent. Okay, it can wiggle something and twist something, and maybe something works out. The step that we took, which may be right, is it may be able to do a little teeny bit of jury rigging, but it's right that to jury rig with actual objects, since you cannot deduce what will happen, you actually have to try it. But that takes time, like and work. So it takes time and work and feedback. Oh, it worked or it didn't work. So if you got a lot of things to try to get something to work, even for just one step in the jury rigging, you're likely to rust before you get it. Now you got 11 things to do sequentially.
It's compilatory explosive, right?
It's worse. No, but it's worse than that. You have no idea on the first step that it's part of the solution. So we invented the following case. Here's this poor robot. And what it's got to do is it's got to rotate the engine block 11 degrees to the left, and it's got to tip it 14 degrees off the vertical. And then it's got to move some arms that grab the coconut and swing it around to bang it on a quarter without breaking it. But it could have rotated the engine block 18 degrees to the left and tipped it 6 degrees. How does the robot have any idea when it happens to rotate the engine block 11 degrees to the left and tip it that it's on the way to the solution? It has zero clue until it gets the whole thing done, and it tries some banging around with coconuts, and it's got to do 10 things, and it's got to get them all to work together, and it cannot look at any part and deduce a next step. It can't.
I think
that's kind of the point of it.
It has to be working on a problem that's internal to its own conception of the world as it does that. Like, I don't think the robot we're imagining could be working on a problem that is objectively viewable by multiple subjects. I think it's got to be working on a problem that's a problem for it in its conception of the world. As it goes through those steps, it's got to be trying to work out some discrepancies in its experience of the world versus its imagination of the world.
Charlie, are you saying the following thing? It's some problem that the robot cares about.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. But even if the robot cares about it, and it's 11 non-deducible steps, to ever work out what to do. We can do it. Caledonian crows can do it. But we're conscious, and so are Caledonian crows.
An area can do it. I mean, you know, this is really the epistemic frame problem, right? You know,
what can do it?
Well, I mean, little tiny flatworms can do this sort of stuff. You know, that's some of the stuff that Mike Levin shows. The whole point of the paper, right, was relevance realization, right? So in order to, you know, certainly there are aspects of an organism, and Mike Levin's work brings this out, so does many others, that are sort of biocybernetic. You can think of them in very computational terms and not be too far off. But in order to get that stuff to work, you have to frame the problem, take it from a huge combinatorial explosive problem to something that you can put into sort of a compact ontology that you can work with. And that's what's non-computation, that step.
Well, but
That's can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
That's the central point of why relevance realization is so central to this story.
Yeah.
Nature resolved it, as I'm suggesting, with the self-relevant feedback of emotion. But what we haven't talked about yet that I think is crucial to this paper is the idea of prediction, that we're prediction machines and that we need to, that error signals are actually free energy. And that the idea is that when there's surprise in the system, that indicates free energy, and that the goal in AI is to have a model, a Markov representation of what the world is. And the better that match, the better and more successful it's going to be. And so there's always a learning process that's building. And then it happens through training, of course, in the robot, but it's happening through interactions with the environment in living systems. So what I've heard as a limitation of the Friston free energy reduction model is that the valence isn't there. And because surprises, and that's absolutely part of it, because in the little cybernetic loop that I talk about that undergirds the infotaxis of bacteria in my paper, is the stimulus and response that we experience as feeling and the motive to move. So those two things are happening together, and the feeling has a valence. Surprises can be good, or surprises can be nasty. And that's what's missing from that model that biology can help add to it, because negative emotion is absolutely about survival. It's about the body saying no to pain and destruction of tissue, and deeper still, stability and the structure of the parts and wholes together. But that there's also positive emotion that is what we pursue. It's what we desire universally, because it's all about adaptation. And what I call the self-developmental engine, self-preservation and self-development, are going on as two engines of the self-regulatory function of emotion. And that's what's missing from the evolutionary story, but that from the beginning, and it shouldn't be, because Darwinian the criteria for natural selection is not only survival and reproduction, it's adaptation. So adaptation takes a much, much, much bigger, more agentic role when you look at it this way, and you realize that what we're learning about epigenetics and the interaction with the environment, that was way back at the beginning, and sentience and consciousness is part of the story from the beginning.
Well, I think I totally agree with what you just said, Katherine. And I think adaptation takes a more agentic role than natural selection can give it. Right? I mean, the novel uses have to be somehow derived independently of natural selection. They have to be derived from the world as we're living in it. And so the other problem that you just mentioned, which is really interesting, is this free energy principle, as I read it, is sort of a Bayesian predictive mechanism, right? Well, the problem I have with that is that it requires so many examples to make a prediction, right? Exactly. I mean, it doesn't get you to understanding. like if you understand something, you can predict something that's never happened before. It's totally novel, like cracking a coconut with an engine block.
Yep.
And so the travel distance from Bayesian prediction to understanding is a really profound. It's a
Yeah, Charles.
distance.
For one thing, you might want, so the really the way to think, I think, about these these Bayesian prediction models, they're sort of instantiations of Rosen anticipatory systems. So when they're little modules, right? So in the paper, when they talk about building various internal predictive models, those things might, the Fristonian models might be pretty good approximations of that. Although I'd like to see how those are instantiated. I think there is some work on, kind of fleshing out how those things are actually instantiated or embodied. You know what I mean? This is one of the threads I actually put in the paper.
What gets me about Friston's model, it's perfectly intelligent, but you have to already know what the relevant variable is.
Right.
You've
That's
already
the point of relevance realization.
the point is you've already solved the relevance realization. It's a great paperweight. Let's make it a better paperweight. So Andrea and I had fun with the following. We're going to do Bayesian updating and induction and deduction, about engine blocks being used as paperweights. So Andrea and I gathered in Italy, and we have now actually used 7,493 engine blocks.
Can you do abduction too, by the way?
What?
Can you do abduction with a robot? So basically it can form a hypothesis, test it.
I'm not sure. I'm going to do induction. Let's get to abduction.
Big Persian fan.
No, yeah, I know. So help me with it, Wayne. Anyway, so here's Andrea and I. We're having croissant, and we've done out on 7,493 engine blocks. They all work as paperweights. We make a universal statement. Okay, we're making an induction. All engine blocks can be used as paperweights. So now we've got a universal law, and we've done what John Stuart Mill said to do. We're doing an induction. We've got a universal quantifier. Now that we've got our universal nomological law, somebody brings us a paperweight and we say, this is a paperweight, because all paperweights can be used as engine blocks. This paperweight can be used as an engine block. And furthermore, we've got an induction. The thing is, none of that will get us to, we can use the engine block to crack open coconuts.
Right.
And it's kind of funny, right? Once we've gotten to affordances, the obvious logic of induction and deduction somehow becomes completely irrelevant. But evolution and technological evolution is all about affordances.
Right.
So, I mean, I love, and so I want to, Fisher seems like a really nice guy, and Bayesian updating and markup blankets are really neat if you already know what the relevant variables are.
Right. It doesn't even get you the recognition of what is an engine block.
No, not at all. You have to frame the problem first. You
never get started, right?
Right.
When John talks about affordances, he'll talk about this is the whole Gibsonian thing where, really what agents recognize first are not things, they're affordances. They're based on, I can pick this up. Oh, you know what? I can actually put something in it too, so I can use it as a cup. But if my situation dictates that I use it as a weapon, my optimal grip on it would be something very different. Right?
And this is so fundamental. I get to be the professor because I'm old. It's all Descartes' fault. So Descartes sitting there, and he's imagining that he's a mind, and he wants to know if he's right about the world. So he wants to know what's true, and God could have been fooling him. Now, one of the things that Descartes never does is do anything. He's a mind in a vat trying to ascertain what's true or false of the world. Like, is this rod really straight? But he's not asking, can I use this rod to stir a pot of coffee? Okay, paint.
Right.
So there's no doing in Descartes. There's no doing in Hume. There's not much doing in Kant until we get to the Critique of Judgment.
No phenomenology either.
Huh?
Neither one. Said no
Yeah.
phenomenology either. Both of those.
Of course, there's no phenomenology. So in Western and British empiricism, there's no doing. And then there's also this naturalistic fallacy. You cannot deduce ought from is. Now, once you're doing, before we get to doing, all living organisms are non-equilibrium systems. So, we got to eat, right? So we got to do or die. So doing versus dying has been with us since life started as autopoietic non-equilibrium systems. So living things have always had to do in the world. And once you're doing in the world, you can do it well or fuck it up. So instrumental ought is there with life. So what's all of this stuff about the naturalistic fallacy?
It's
just
forgetting that the analytical turn philosophy, which was, I mean, some good things came out of it, but for the most part, it was a 500-year fuck up.
Yeah, well, it was.
Well, I want to throw in that moral ought is also there at the beginning, because there are things that are universally good for life, and there are things that are universally destructive of life. And
Ian McGilchrist would absolutely agree with you. Someone else.
yeah, to get to Charlie's point, I think that the whole idea of relevance realization, of course, is what we're zeroing in on here. And I do hope you read my paper, because I showed the sensory motor circuitry of the E. coli bacterium and the chemistry of this, and talked about feedback and feedback circuits as they give rise to this sort of informational flow. But that was 10 years ago, and Michael Levin's work shows that the feedback stuff is actually electromagnetic circuitry and membrane voltage and all that really cool stuff. But that what your question was about the, let's see, where was it? I'm sorry, I got lost again. The yes, no logic of pain and pleasure is the value system that's universal. And we just need to understand how that's working. But let's see where I'm sorry, I had a.
I think of it as like universal. I think of it as like a universal directional signal in a way. Like there's love and fear.
Oh, that's where I was going.
Fear are kind of directional opposites.
Thank you. Because the relevance realization story they're telling here absolutely gets the first step, which is a comparison between the internality of the system and the external environment. And that it's that relationship where the affordances and the Umwelt and all of that is born. So that's a key piece of it. But then they jump to the learning that that sets down a memory trace for predictive processing. And what they've jumped over are the two steps that the nature uses, because there's in the self-regulatory cybernetic loop that I'm talking about that goes all the way back, and it started a long, long time ago, is this ongoing comparison between self and not self environment. And then when there's an imbalance, there's a signal that's triggered, and that coupled with that signal is a corrective response to rebalance the system. And then the logic of that rebalancing response then gets encoded back into the memory banks. There's two steps that are missing. And when you look at what's happening with living systems, that is the signal and the response that's coupled together in what I call hedonic qualia. It feels good or bad for me, and it triggers an approach or avoidant behavioral response. And there's a much deeper logic that there's an edge of chaos story here. If you know a little bit about what's going on with Levin stuff, and that what Richard Watson is saying.
Yeah, he was supposed to be here, but
I'm so sorry he's not here, because we haven't even gotten to that level of the discussion yet, where does the signaling, where does the sensory ability to perceive this come from? And I argue that the magic word that you said is that we need to be sensitive to context. And I argue that emotion, in this basic positive, negative, feels, approach, and avoidant semantic information bit was the very first sensory system. And it's woven through the identity structure, the self-identifying trajectories in cell differentiation, when you be coming from a pluripotent stem cell into a liver cell or whatever, that there's identity information encoded in that now we know through Levin's work is bioelectric in its deeper manifestation than the chemistry with which it operates. So the 3 steps are the comparison, the signal, and the self-corrective response, and then it feeds back into the Markovian blanket with the training. So the AI people only have the first step and the 4th step, and they need to either come up with something that's as brilliant as what nature is doing with the stimulus response, and it's all based on associative learning and deep neural networks anyway, and opponent processes. But that you need that fundamental semantic information bit, which says, this is good for me and this is bad for me. This gets back to the very question of food and versus poison. And that,
well, I think I can recreate autopoiesis from scratch just by worrying about what happens to my understanding of the world. So if I'm an organism and I'm motivated by love and fear, and I love what I understand, what I can understand, and I fear the destruction of that understanding, then already I'm encapsulating what needs to be within myself to remain.
And that's key. That's key, because what I argue that if emotion's a sensory system, it delivers sensory self-regulatory information. And that binary, good for me, bad for me, pleasure, pain, yes, no logic of the body, even at the level of reptiles, and it's certainly at mammals, you get a diversification into the basic emotions, which, and instead of love and fear, we'll get there. I mean, love and, it's joy and sadness, which is why you have manic depression, which is why you have, but it's also
right. It explains
anger,
why,
disgust, fear, and sadness. And 4 out of 5 are negative, because it's so important to understand the information that it contains about universal needs and requirements. And then the positive emotion is much more open and fluid, because it's about our creativity, our unique potentials genetically, whatever else they might be. So
I mean,
I think it comes down to care.
We can have emotions that cause us to destroy ourselves.
And then you get the complex emotions, which are love and hate, but the point is, we were supposed to reduce the circumstances that elicited stress, which is why there's 4 more times information about what stresses the body. But instead of reducing those things, we have learned to, this is the self-regulatory sense at the first person, we've learned to use the manipulation of pleasure and pain as punishment and reward in our social systems. Religion is full of it. The whole concept of good and evil is all about aligning to what we want to tell you from the top down to regulate you from the outside. And if you don't have that biological logic, you're off already. You're off, and that's one of the big problems that we have. So the complex emotions are all about the realm of the mind, and they're unique to your experiences. They show up like the basic emotions are innate across all living systems. The binary level, but the basic emotions show up within the first 6 months of life. They're part of the hardware, but that the software piece of it through our developmental adaptation is unique to your language, your culture, all of your belief systems. So, but the logic, yes, no logic is still there. That's why everyone wants to transcend the self and the negative emotions, destructive emotions. No, they're delivering information about what not to do. And we've created this whole man-made layer of suffering that is part of the meaning crisis, because this value system has always been opaque to science. It's a value-free. Stu was totally right about the naturalistic fallacy. I think he heard me say that once.
I mean, a lot of this, the root of of autopoiesis and a lot of these things, and relevance, realization, all these things is care, right? And I don't think you can divorce care from experience, right?
It's collectivity. It's collectivity. It's
Right.
the emergence of collective behavior from the parts. You cannot have anything if you don't have that. And there's an chaos story all the way down at the bottom that I'd like to talk to Richard about.
These meta constraints that are not, not simply Boolean. I'm not sure. I don't see that you can have that without care. And if you don't actually have to make yourself, like I talk to computer scientists that are thinking about, sort of simulating ways that the computer can die if it doesn't, do what it needs to do. But it doesn't have to make itself, right? It doesn't. It's not thermodynamically open. It doesn't have to construct constraints and work cycles.
Or its mind. It's constructing its mind.
Can I build on what you and Kay just said? See about this. Let's consider a mixed microbial community.
Okay.
Where the species afford niches to one another such that they make a living in the context of the other species. It's a big mutualist community with 47 species. And in fact, I'm working with that with some friends, the emergence of such a thing.
Yeah, I heard that in discussion with Mike here.
So, yes, we're writing a paper called Life Will Find a Way. So the analog of the emergence of an autocatalytic set with a bunch of species is the emergence of an autocatalytic affordance set, where creatures get to make livings with one another, like the gut microbiome. Is that a good case of care? Namely, each species really cares about the other species because they're all making a living with one another.
Well, they're parts of one another.
Probably.
Parts of the whole.
I feel like you would get a meta constraint. You would get another, to use your word, Kantian whole, or another, another global meta constraint.
It's a higher ordered Kantian
and I expect the
made up of it, but made up of lower ordered Kantian agents.
And this, so the care would probably be, in my mind, at the higher level, right?
Yeah.
And
I'm wondering
if you divorce this from, it's just, this stuff gets also deep. But John has a big project of sort of taking, sort of modernizing Neoplatonist epistemology and ontology in terms of a contact epistemology and a level, the continuous level ontology with emergence and emanation, emergence up, constraint down. This is very conversant with Neoplatonism. But without that stuff, without that context, a lot of this stuff you end up just hand waving. Without that sort of philosophy to hold it together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It seems like a lot of what we're talking about here is Gestalt perception in a sense.
That's related.
And I wonder if I can tie that back to what you were talking about earlier, Stu, when you were mentioning an engine block needs to be rotated 14 degrees one way, 11 degrees another, and the robot has no idea, and it could easily overshoot in many different ways. But if you have that Gestalt perception of exactly what sort of more context you're looking at there, you're maybe
That's
to
a really
infer
good point.
or anticipate something going on.
Bringing up Gestalt.
I'm so glad you mentioned that.
I actually had the thrill as an undergraduate at Dartmouth. Wolfgang Köhler, one of the founders of Gestalt psychology, came to Dartmouth, and I got to be his research assistant, and he was a lovely guy. But you're just saying something that I would never have thought of. After all, Gestalt psychology got lost with receptor fields, right? And edge receptors and point receptors and constructing logic circuits to recognize grandmothers and all of that stuff. And Gestalt started sounding pretty fuzzy, even though there was all sorts of evidence. What if your intuition is right? The Gestalt from 1934 is another way in which we have evidence, like Lashley at the time too, of seeing a whole picture. That's what you're saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's somewhere back in Gestalt psychology from the 1930s.
Well, it's also in Ian McGilchrist's work with the hemispheres, because that is what an entire half of our brain is dedicated to doing, because it's just this leveling up from the original.
What should be the dominant half, right?
So can I try to raise a almost formulated question? So we know what receptor fields are, and we know what edge receptors are, and we know all of these singularities in the mapping of edge receptors in the cortex and so on, because you can't map them without singularities. And they are the image of the mind as a computer, or the brain as a computer, is the receptor fields. If we go back and look at Gestalt psychology and the mentality of apes from 1930 in Tenerife and Caledonian crows, is there something about the Gestalt whole that is finding the way to fashion something that cannot be deduced? That just might be Kate's sort of a psychologist. I was. That really seems to be something.
So if your robot had to eat the coconut,
Stuart, I'm so glad, and Eric and all of you guys, I'm so excited that you all have picked this up now, because I actually invited to this discussion this guy named Stephen Lehar, who's a fascinating guy.
Oh yeah.
Who has done enormous work on Gestalt and the relation between Gestalt and harmonic resonance.
Maybe next time around, I think Stu can't do it again for about a month or so. But
Charlie, can you give us some references to find that work? That would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, let me put it in the chat. The link.
I'm not gonna.
Because in thinking about this, and there really is, the logic is encoded in bioelectrics, and the membrane potential is central to this story, as is polarity, in terms of a message to the body about a change that is destructive or a change that is constructive. And that is polarity itself. When the cell membrane is in a hyperpolar state, that's associated with plasticity and this exact kind of free energy for coming up with novel, new stuff in the parts. But the other piece of it is when it loses polarity, that's associated with the kind of plasticity that's going in the direction of destruction of tissue. So it's all about that plasticity in terms of what the body can do to use that work in this moment. Otherwise, the top-down homeostatic stuff is what usually keeps those constraints going. So you have homeostasis down and emergence up, but the emergence is actually the work of the parts, and the homeostasis is the work of the whole.
May I throw out some things that are maybe useful? There's all that work on the mentality of apes. There's all of this work on primates and primate cognition. There's all sorts of work on Caledonian crows and the neat things they do. Many years ago, in 1970, I wrote a paper entitled Articulation of Parts Explanations in Biology. The phrase of it, I don't know exactly how I got there. Let me see if I can reconstruct it, because it may bear on what we're talking about. And then, is there evidence that crows do it, or chimps do it, or we do it? So it was about the following idea. Suppose I see an automobile as an automobile, and the function of the wheel on the ground is to turn and move the car. But I could see the automobile as a really fancy way to get a hot engine block and fry eggs. Mm-hmm. So I've got a system. I see it as doing something or being used for something. To be seeing it as being used for something is to see it as an affordance. And when I see it as an affordance, as I see it as different affordances, I break it into parts in different ways. And then I articulate the parts such that they accomplish the affordance. I mean, the engine block gets hot and you can fry your egg. And the point of that paper so long ago was, so who says what this thing's doing, right? So there's indefinitely many ways to put the thing together and see what it's doing. So what's the right way?
There is
Somehow,
no right way.
yeah,
It
somehow there
depends on
is no
context
right
and your
way.
goals, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
That's
So
the self-relevance.
yeah,
That's what
so
I need right here, right now
so
in my
yeah, so
affordable
somehow
landscape.
there was in that a predecessor to all of this stuff 50 years later, which is the arbitrariness of seeing things as useful for different purposes. And is it the case that when the Caledonian crow is doing it, or when the ape is figuring out what to do, the chimp or whatever, there's good data to say that what it's doing is it's partitioning whatever the thing is into different parts, which can articulate together to accomplish something different.
You really
And,
look at even
and that's not deductive.
Yes. It's so
Yeah.
so Stephen Lehar has this in this video I just linked. He walks his way through how he feels like harmonic resonance has these properties of he calls them emergence, reification, multi-stability, and invariance. And he talks about the different optical illusions that demonstrate these. And so it's totally fascinating. So, the rotating shapes is invariance, right? Rotating shapes in space. And then like the multi-stability is like, the optical illusion that's like both a duck and a rabbit at the same time. And it's stable in either image, but it's, you can.
It's really a duck.
Right, exactly. Everyone has a strong opinion.
At this point in the conversation, insist that it's a duck.
Right. It's like the internet meme of the blue dress, that's obviously not white.
No, by the way, guys, just so I don't forget, it might be helpful for everyone who's here just to add me to your contacts so that when I send you the link to the to the comment, it doesn't get thrown in your spam filter or whatever.
Great.
It's on the soup to nuts email.
No, please do, but listen, I've just realized something of cosmic importance. You know the phrase, if it looks like a duck and if it walks like a duck, it's a duck, right? Well, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's a rabbit.
Might be.
But, nobody's used that. You guys.
Does it quack?
I'm leaving out the quack part. So let's get I'm going to want to get off and watch Not Face the Nation or Meet the Press or something in 10 minutes. But I just it's our country falls apart. But I got to a funny point in what we're talking about. So Andrea Rowley and I have a paper online whose title is the emergence of life an expected phase transition in the evolving universe? And obviously the answer is yes. Otherwise, but anyway, we got to a very strange spot. I mean, I knew what we would do for a bunch of us, but anyway, we got to Gonan Ashkenazi's autocatalytic peptide set. Okay, that I've now explained. So this peptide set constructs itself, right? Peptide 1 is a boundary condition that binds two fragments of peptide 2 and glues them together to make peptide 2 and does work. And then peptide 2 does it for 3 and around the cycle. So pause, Gonan's set specifically constructs exactly itself, right? Hold that. Now, I think we all know von Neumann's idea of the self-reproducing machine from 1956.
Yeah, that's Hoffmeier's paper in the reference from 2021, where he brings in formal cause. So he shows that an autopoietic system is close to efficient causation, but actually open to formal causation.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the references.
Let me just say this because we're running out of time. Then please say that. So I started thinking. So here's von Neumann's a great idea. There's universal Turing machines. Let's invent a universal constructor called U. And so the universal constructor can construct anything. So in order for it to construct anything specific, it needs instructions. So the instructions are some beams that are welded together, and they're put inside the universal constructor. And now something magic happens. the universal, the instructions now have a dual use. As instructions, they are used to construct something specific. It could have been a choo-choo train, but what is specifically constructed is a universal constructor. But then what one has to do is make a physical copy of the instructions in Universal Constructor 1 and put it in Universal Constructor 2. And then people said, "Von Neumann, you're brilliant. That turns out what DNA does." And the dual use of the instructions is precisely the hardware-software distinction, right? Is that anywhere in Gonan Ashkenazi's system? And the answer is no. This is very puzzling.
All right, that's sort of
I'm
Yeah,
not so sure.
no, let me just say it, then let's fight with
Oh,
it.
I know you pretty well.
But yeah, but they haven't heard it. So what Gonan's system is, you got 9 peptides. Each peptide ligates 2 half fragments of the next peptide around the cycle of the 9 peptides. It constructs specifically itself. Gonan's system is not a universal constructor. It's a specific I construct me system, and it reproduces, and in fact, it can evolve to a certain extent. There is no separable instruction that is being followed that then has to be copied and put in the new one.
You know what
So-
actually helps? I'm sorry, I'll let you finish. I'll tell you that.
Well, I just am finding this very puzzling because,
Well, here's something that helps, and so if you go back,
yeah, go ahead.
Jay, I know we have to lose this. So if you go back to Rosen and his early, kind of his earlier work, when you go back all the way to MR systems, right? So when you understand, and this is from a process ontology rather than a substance ontology, but when you realize that what's going on, what the identity of parts are in a Kantian whole that's an MR system are functional components. Functional components are not physical things. The hardware-software distinction completely evaporates. There's also
fantastic,
arguments
right?
about that. Yeah, there's also philosophical arguments.
No, because it's a functional description and it achieves a functional closure.
Yes.
Constructed. So there's something about the hardware-software distinction, which is treating things as objects, not as processes.
It's mistaken. I mean, it's useful in certain contexts. It's a useful model in certain contexts, but it's not universal.
That's great. And yet, our understanding of biology, since the genetic code, DNA replication and the genetic code, is that life is all about hardware, software.
No, not at all. But that I mean, right? So you have to think about it precisely the same way. That's why I say what the DNA is in your cell is sort of a toolbox. It can do a lot of things depending on the context. And sometimes it can act as hardware. Sometimes it can act as software. Sometimes it can act as kind of a hybrid of the two, which is really what everything is anyway in a cell.
That's really neat. Thank you.
I think that gets us back to the opponent processing a little bit as well.
Yep,
when you have
closely
2 different
related.
ways. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, maybe that's a good place to leave it, guys. Thank you so much for participating, and this has been fantastic. I've recorded it and I'll email it to you guys so you can review and think about it.
If you stop recording, I want to say something.
Oh, okay. I'll stop